There's a quiet power in the moment someone walks away and expects to leave you smaller. They imagine the silence they've created will echo as emptiness. Yet beneath that hush, something ancient stirs. You feel it like flint striking stone. The Stoic realization that every departure is an invitation, every fracture a doorway. You don't chase, plead, or rehearse explanations. Instead, you sharpen presence. You take the raw clay of loss and place it on your inner wheel, turning pain into contour, absence into architecture. Because this story is no longer about who left, it's about who you become while the door is closing. The Romans called it fortitudo, the unyielding courage that transforms wounds into wisdom. And, as the world assumes you're breaking, you settle into stillness, stacking disciplined breaths until they form pillars. From that foundation you will rise, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself inevitable. In the chapters ahead, we'll walk through 12 Stoic refinements, 12 deliberate turns of the wheel, that shape you into the one they will remember, the one they never truly saw, the one they'll whisper about when silence reminds them what they lost. Ready? 1. Build your silence into a sanctuary. There's a moment after someone leaves where everything feels suspended. The messages stop. The rhythm you were used to disappears. And what's left behind isn't just quiet. It's a strange emptiness. The space between two heartbeats. The stillness after the storm. They expect that silence to break you, to echo with regret, to leave you pacing around your memories, desperately trying to rewrite a past that's already done. But what they don't realize is this. Silence, when held with strength, is not absence. It's power. It's the beginning of transformation. Most people fear silence because they've never learned how to sit inside it without needing noise to validate them. They run from it, fill it with distractions, music, scrolling, calls, validation-seeking behavior. But the Stoic doesn't run from silence. The Stoic builds within it, constructs something solid, unshakable, a sanctuary not made of walls or windows, but of calm awareness, a space where the mind is finally able to breathe again, unclouded by the chaos of someone else's confusion. When someone leaves expecting your collapse, your silence becomes your response, not out of pride, not as a tactic, but as a reflection of self-respect. Because real strength isn't proven through shouting or confrontation, it's revealed through who you become when the world stops clapping, when the audience walks out, when the echo fades and only your own voice remains. What do you do with that space? That's the test. And for the Stoic, that's where the work begins. At first, that silence may feel like a wound. You'll reach for your phone instinctively. You'll imagine what you'd say if given the chance. You'll replay what went wrong. This is normal. The mind craves resolution. But the Stoic teaches us not to resist discomfort, but to use it. You breathe into the quiet. You feel it fully. And slowly, you stop trying to escape it and start listening to it. What it's teaching you, what it's revealing, where it's pointing. And here's what begins to emerge. Clarity. You start to see not just what they did, but what you allowed, where you overextended, where you lowered your standards, where you ignored your intuition for the sake of keeping someone close. This realization stings, but it's the sting of awakening, not of shame. And in that awareness, your silence becomes sacred. Not a space of regret, but a room of rebuilding. You light a metaphorical fire in the center of that silence. You sit with your breath. You journal. You walk without headphones. You start making decisions for your own growth, not as a reaction to their absence, but as a reflection of your rediscovered presence. You stop trying to be heard by them and start listening to yourself. This is how you become the one they'll regret letting go, not because you punished them, but because you evolved beyond the version of yourself they ever took the time to know. Because your silence didn't become desperation, it became depth. Because they expected your absence to sound like longing, but instead it became the hum of peace, the rhythm of discipline, the architecture of a new identity that no longer needs their approval to feel whole. Let them wonder why you're not reaching out. Let them check your profile and find nothing. Let them sit with the quiet they left behind. Meanwhile, you're not waiting, you're building, you're refining, you're rising, you're becoming untouchable, not by being colder, but by being rooted. Because the truth is, not everyone who walks away deserves a front row seat to your transformation. Your silence is not a weapon, it's a threshold. And when you cross it with calm, with grace, and with inner structure, you enter a new kind of power, one that doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. And from that place, they'll remember you, not because you tried to remind them, but because the person they walked away from is no longer the one they could ever reach again. 2. Let your growth be your revenge. There's a natural instinct after being hurt to want them to see it, to witness your pain, to understand what they did, to feel just a fraction of what they left behind in you. You imagine the words you'd say, the confrontation that would finally make them realize your worth. But here's the truth the Stoics knew. Real growth doesn't need an audience, and real transformation doesn't seek revenge. It makes revenge irrelevant. They expected you to fall apart, to become smaller, messier, unrecognizable in your grief. They left assuming their absence would define your future. But what they didn't expect, what they never accounted for, was your ability to rise. Quietly, steadily, without apology, without announcement, not to prove anything to them, but to reclaim everything within you that you once gave away too easily. Growth is the most powerful form of response because it doesn't depend on them. It's not conditional. It doesn't beg for recognition. It's internal, rooted. You start feeding your mind with better ideas. You choose discipline over distraction. You learn to be alone, not as a punishment, but as a path to real clarity. You reconnect with your body, your focus, your sense of purpose. The pain that once clouded your vision becomes the pressure that sharpens your edge. The Stoics believed that everything painful holds potential, that loss, betrayal, and abandonment are not detours, but catalysts, not something to get over, but something to grow through. And that's what growth really is. Not about winning a breakup or outshining someone who wronged you. It's about coming home to yourself, becoming so whole that the version of you who needed their approval no longer exists. But make no mistake, this kind of growth takes work. It takes mornings when you get up, even though the weight of sadness still lingers. It takes choosing the hard path, the workout, the meditation, the journaling, over the easier one, bitterness, blame, distraction. It takes the kind of self-discipline that says, I will not let this pain dictate my identity. I will not let their decision become the definition of my worth. And with time, something subtle and extraordinary begins to happen. The things that used to trigger you stop having power. Their silence no longer feels personal. Their approval no longer feels necessary. Because you've built something bigger than their absence. You've built momentum. You start setting boundaries, not from anger, but from clarity. You attract different energy, not because you're trying, but because you've elevated. You become magnetic, not for who you're chasing, but for who you're becoming. And maybe one day they'll look back. Maybe they'll scroll or hear about your progress or run into you and sense it immediately. That energy, that presence, that unshakable calm you never had before. But by then, it won't matter. Because you won't need that moment anymore. You won't need their recognition. You won't even crave their regret. You'll have outgrown the version of you that ever needed to be seen by someone who chose to look away. So let your growth be your response. Let your discipline be your answer. Let your energy be so deeply invested in your evolution that nothing from the past can interrupt your future. That's not spite. That's Stoicism. That's rising. Not to make them regret losing you, but to become someone who no longer even fits within the world they once knew. 3. Don't explain. Transcend. There's a moment after you've been dismissed, underestimated, or walked away from, where your instinct is to make them understand, to explain your side, to clarify your intentions, to unpack the depth of what you offered, because surely, if they really knew, they would have stayed. But the truth is harder. Sometimes people don't leave because they misunderstood you. They leave because they never had the capacity to receive you. And no amount of explanation changes that. The Stoic doesn't beg to be understood, because to be understood is not the highest goal. Integrity is. You can live a life in perfect alignment and still be misread, judged, or discarded by people whose lens was never clear to begin with. And so the Stoic doesn't plead. He doesn't over-clarify. He doesn't draft paragraphs or rehearse perfect comebacks. He transcends, not as an act of defiance, but as a sign of evolution. Because when you know who you are, you stop arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. You see, explanation is often rooted in fear. The fear that their version of you will be the one that stays, that the story they tell will become the story others believe. But when you rise in silence, when you elevate your standards, your presence, your peace, that story starts to dissolve, because there's something undeniable about growth, something unarguable about presence, and eventually the truth speaks louder than your words ever could. Transcendence doesn't mean indifference. It means maturity. It means choosing elevation over engagement. It means you no longer allow yourself to be pulled into low-frequency dynamics that drain more than they clarify. It means you've recognized this fundamental truth. If someone couldn't see your worth when you were offering it with open hands, they won't see it after a monologue. They'll only see it when they feel the absence of what you used to give so freely. And in that space, you rise, not theatrically, not performatively, but deeply. You read more, you train harder, you heal your nervous system, you rediscover the parts of yourself that went dormant while you were too busy being available to someone who didn't know how to value presence. You become intentional with your time, selective with your energy, rooted in your direction, and all of this happens, not to send a message, but because your evolution no longer leaves room for the version of you who needed to be explained. You stop being accessible to the past, not because you're punishing it, but because you've outgrown it. And anyone who left, doubted, or minimized you, they'll feel that shift. They'll notice, not in what you say, but in what you no longer say, in what you no longer tolerate, in what you no longer chase. Because silence becomes your boundary, excellence becomes your language, and the need to be understood is replaced by the clarity of being aligned. So ask yourself, where are you still over-explaining, still trying to justify your growth, your silence, your distance? And who are you trying to convince? Someone else, or the version of yourself that still thinks you need their approval? Let it go. Let them think what they want. You have a life to live, a mind to sharpen, a soul to strengthen. The real ones don't need an explanation, and the ones who do, they don't deserve one. Transcend, quietly, consistently, completely. 4. Focus on what you can control. When someone walks away, disrespects you, or undervalues what you gave, your mind naturally wants to fix it, to figure out why, to replay every word, every gesture, looking for clues, trying to reverse engineer their decision or your mistake. You want to understand their motives, anticipate their next move, maybe even change their perception. But the Stoics offer a sobering and liberating truth. None of that is yours to carry. Their actions, their story, their choices, all outside your control. And to obsess over what you don't control is to surrender your peace to someone else's chaos. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That line is more than a quote. It's a compass. It tells you where to place your attention when life becomes unpredictable. It tells you where to pour your energy when someone else's decisions break your rhythm. And most of all, it teaches you where your real power lives. Not in their return, not in their regret, but in your response. You don't control whether they recognize your value. You don't control whether they come back. You don't control how they tell the story of your time together. But you do control what happens next. You control whether you spiral or steady yourself, whether you weaponize your pain or use it to refine your character. You control your routines, your habits, your internal dialogue. You control whether you react from ego or respond with purpose. And that's where freedom begins, not when things go your way, but when you stop needing them to. When you detach your emotional well-being from external approval, when your peace is no longer held hostage by someone else's absence. When you wake up and say, "I'm still here, I still have work to do, I still have standards to uphold. Whether or not they see it has nothing to do with my duty." The more you focus on what's outside your reach, the more you scatter your energy. You become anxious, exhausted, bitter. But the moment you turn inward, you begin to gather your strength again. You become anchored, unmoved. You walk, train, read, rest. Not for show, not to be seen, but because it aligns with who you are becoming. And slowly, your internal world becomes a kingdom, guarded, stable, unshakable. That's the Stoic path. To wake up each day and ask, what can I control today? What can I improve in myself, regardless of what they do or don't do? And then to pour yourself fully into that, with discipline, with grace, with no need for applause. You become less interested in their attention and more invested in your alignment, less interested in their explanations, and more concerned with your evolution. They may stay gone. They may never understand. That's not the point. The point is that you became someone who didn't need them to, for your life to move forward. And perhaps one day they'll notice. They'll see that you didn't fall apart, didn't chase, didn't collapse under their silence. You rose, quietly, steadily, without needing to fix what was never yours to carry. That's when the regret will come, not because you demanded it, but because your peace made their absence feel irrelevant. So simplify the equation. Let go of what's beyond you. Master what's within you. Because in that space, between reaction and control, is where your next chapter begins. 5. Detach with dignity. There's a kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't block, unfollow, or explode. It doesn't need to prove strength through spectacle. It simply lets go, quietly, completely, and without bitterness. That's what it means to detach with dignity. Not as an act of revenge, but as a declaration of self-respect. A line drawn, not in anger, but in calm. A closing of the door, not to punish, but to protect. Most people think letting go means erasing emotion, that if you still feel, you haven't truly moved on. But the Stoics knew better. They didn't preach emotional denial. They taught emotional discipline. You can acknowledge the pain without clinging to it. You can honor the memory without being enslaved by it. You can say, "This mattered," and still walk away when it no longer aligns with who you're becoming. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. The clarity to see that some people don't deserve front-row access to your evolution. The clarity to know that peace is not found in convincing someone to stay. It's found in choosing not to chase. Because the moment you begin trying to win someone back is the moment you place their approval above your own sovereignty. And that is a price too high for a soul that's starting to awaken. You may still feel love, you may still carry memories, but detachment doesn't ask you to forget. It asks you to release, to stop reopening the wound through mental replays, to stop searching for signs in every silence, to stop checking in on people who never checked in on your spirit, and instead to shift that energy inward, to use it as fuel for the person you're now building, brick by quiet brick. When someone leaves, it's easy to believe that closure will come from them, from a final talk, a proper goodbye, a moment where everything finally makes sense. But the truth is, that moment rarely arrives. And even when it does, it often leaves you emptier than before, because closure doesn't come from them. It comes from your decision to close the chapter for yourself. And the most dignified way to do that: stillness. Not silence filled with resentment, but stillness filled with resolve. You don't need to explain your healing. You don't need to update them on your progress. You don't need to make them regret leaving. You just need to live in such deep alignment with your values, your peace, and your growth, that they feel the weight of your absence, not because you made it heavy, but because you made it sacred. Detaching with dignity means you stop negotiating with what you know no longer serves you. It means you stop trying to revive what keeps wounding you. It means you stop holding on to people who only loved you when it was convenient. And most of all, it means you stop letting their behavior dictate your worth. So ask yourself, am I still holding on? Still replaying old scenarios? Still giving space in my mind to someone who's no longer here? And if the answer is yes, ask yourself something deeper. What would happen if I let go, not with pain, but with pride? Not because I gave up, but because I grew up. That's what detachment looks like. Not erasure, not denial, but freedom. The kind that walks away, not loudly, but finally, and in doing so, becomes unforgettable. 6. Create a life they can't access anymore. Sometimes the greatest act of healing isn't loud or visible, it's architectural. It's the slow, disciplined construction of a life so rich, so aligned, so vibrant, that the person who once took you for granted no longer fits in it. Not because you blocked them, not because you hate them, but because you've grown into a new environment they never helped you build. The Stoics didn't waste time trying to impress the past. They focused entirely on the present moment and what could be built from it. That's your task now, not to keep glancing back, wondering if they'll notice your progress, but to look forward, ruthlessly committed to creating something better from what you've learned, without asking for their validation. You see, when someone loses you and expects access again, they're often not thinking about the real you. They're thinking about the version of you that tolerated inconsistency, that overgave, that softened your standards just to keep the connection alive. But that version is gone now, and what remains is a wiser, stronger, more self-possessed version of you who has no interest in repeating old cycles. And it's not about making them jealous or proving anything. It's about honoring your own growth so deeply that you no longer allow anyone back into your life who represents your past wounds. You begin to build in silence. You tighten your circle. You study more. You move your body with purpose. You develop new habits, healthier routines, clearer thoughts. You no longer beg for peace. You create it. And in doing so, you become inaccessible to the kind of chaos you once mistook for love. This is what real transformation looks like. Not re-entering old conversations to prove your worth, but outgrowing the need for those conversations entirely. When they look for you again, they find a life they don't recognize, a routine they were never part of, a mindset they never helped shape, and a peace they can't penetrate. That's the kind of life you build when you finally stop asking, "Will they regret letting me go?" and start asking, "What can I create now that they're no longer in my way?" Because every ounce of energy you use to spend waiting for closure or wondering if they'll come back, that's energy that can now go towards something real, a skill, a business, a deeper connection with yourself. When your days become filled with creation instead of reaction, your reality begins to shift. And eventually, the pain that once consumed your mind becomes just a part of your origin story, not your identity. And when you build like this, consistently, quietly, with full presence, they'll feel it. They'll sense the distance. They'll see the light in your eyes that no longer dims in their absence. But by then, you'll be too far ahead to turn around, not out of pride, but out of purpose. So start building, even if it's messy at first, even if no one sees it, especially if no one sees it. Let your life become a temple of self-respect, a fortress of discipline, a garden of peace they can't walk through anymore. Not because the gate is locked, but because it's grown too high for who they still are. You're not trying to become someone they miss. You're becoming someone who no longer misses them. 7. Make your peace louder than their absence. There's a silence that screams, not in bitterness, not in revenge, but in presence. The kind of presence that says, "I no longer need you here to feel whole." That's the power of real peace. It doesn't try to replace someone. It doesn't try to pretend nothing happened. It simply becomes so deep, so grounding, so complete, that their absence starts to feel small against the vastness of your calm. Most people, when they're left behind or walked away from, feel pressure to prove something, to post, to glow up, to send subtle messages laced in stories and captions, hoping to be seen. But the Stoic way isn't about being seen. It's about being still. It's about becoming so anchored in your own center that you stop orbiting around anyone who no longer deserves to be your sun. That kind of peace doesn't perform. It doesn't scream, "Look how well I'm doing." It whispers, "I no longer need to show you anything." And that's what makes it powerful. Because when someone walks away expecting your world to collapse, and instead finds it flourishing, they feel that. Not because you made it loud, but because you made it real. To make your peace louder than their absence means you start replacing the noise, the overthinking, the what-ifs, the mental debates, with quiet rituals, with journaling in the early hours, with walking under the sky and listening to your breath, with drinking your coffee slowly instead of scrolling to distract yourself from the ache, with building a daily life that honors your nervous system more than your need to be noticed. And in that space, something shifts. You stop needing their presence to validate your worth. You stop waiting for an apology to feel whole again. You stop checking if they're watching because you're finally watching yourself. Not with judgment, but with care. The same care you gave away too easily before. Your peace grows every time you resist the urge to react. Every time you let silence speak for you. Every time you walk away from drama you once danced in. And eventually, that peace becomes your baseline. You no longer return to old conversations, not because they didn't matter, but because they no longer match your energy. When they try to revisit you, and they will, they'll find someone who didn't break down, someone who didn't rush to fill the void with validation, someone who didn't collapse under solitude, but used it as a canvas to build something better. And here's the irony. The quieter your peace, the louder it becomes to the ones who lost access to it. Because nothing disturbs the ego like realizing you're no longer needed, that your absence didn't stop their momentum, that your silence didn't sink them, it freed them. So protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. Nurture it, not as a weapon, but as a refuge. And when the world tries to pull you back into old battles, respond with presence. When memories whisper, smile and keep building. Let your daily life become the only reply you ever need. Because that's the kind of peace no one can fake, and no one forgets. 8. Radiate self-respect in every gesture. There's a kind of presence that doesn't demand attention. It commands it. Not because it shouts, but because it refuses to shrink. That's what self-respect looks like. It's not loud, it's not theatrical, and it doesn't require permission. It just is. You feel it in the way someone walks into a room without seeking approval, in the way they say no without guilt, in the way they carry themselves, not to impress, but to protect their peace. When someone lets you go, especially after taking you for granted, there's often a part of you that wants to show them what they lost. You think, if I just glow up, they'll regret it. If I just say the right thing, they'll understand. But the truth is, real power doesn't come from proving. It comes from embodying. It's not about trying to make them look back. It's about building a life so aligned that you're too far ahead for them to catch up. And it starts with the small things. How you get out of bed in the morning, how you speak to yourself in silence, how you choose what to tolerate, what to engage with, and what to walk away from. Every decision, every boundary is a brick in the foundation of your self-respect. And when you build that foundation strong enough, you no longer have to chase closure. You become the closure. The Stoics didn't teach self-respect through ego. They taught it through discipline, through a daily commitment to live in accordance with your values, not your emotions, not your wounds, not your fears. When someone doesn't see your worth, you don't need to lower your standard. You need to raise your focus, to return to your core, to do the inner work that makes your outer world non-negotiable. Because here's the truth. People remember how you respected yourself more than how you treated them. They remember that you didn't tolerate half-love, that you didn't wait around, begging to be chosen, that you didn't collapse when they withdrew. You rose, not with arrogance, but with elegance. And that kind of self-respect, it lingers, it humbles, it haunts. It's in the way you speak, clear, grounded, with no need to convince. It's in the way you hold space for yourself, without apology. It's in the way you keep building your life without hoping they'll see it. Because when you respect yourself deeply, you stop needing recognition. You no longer need someone to miss you to know your value. You know it, you live it, you radiate it. And eventually, that energy begins to repel anything that isn't aligned. People who once toyed with your time start to feel the quiet wall around your soul, not because you're guarded, but because you've outgrown the version of you that begged to be seen. You don't just move on, you rise up, not for them to regret, but for you to reclaim. So check your posture, your words, your pace, not in performance, but in purpose. Let everything about you say, I know who I am, even if you never did. 9. Use pain as your sculptor, not your prison. Pain has two paths. One leads inward, to despair, paralysis, and self-pity, the kind that traps you in endless rumination. The other carves outward, shaping your strength, revealing your depth, and chiseling away the parts of you that were never truly yours. Most people choose the first by default. They let heartbreak define them. But the Stoic chooses the second, not because it's easier, but because it's real. Because suffering, when faced with courage, can become a kind of divine craftsmanship. You were hurt, that's true. Maybe betrayed, maybe replaced, maybe discarded by someone who never really understood what they were holding. And that pain, it's not meant to be buried. It's meant to be studied, transformed, alchemized. Like a sculptor with a block of marble, pain gives you the material to work with. Rough, unformed, and often unwelcome. But within it lies the possibility of a version of you that's more grounded, more awake, and more powerful than before. The question isn't, why did they hurt me? The question is, what part of me is now being called to rise? That shift from victimhood to vision is where everything begins to change, because pain doesn't just wound, it reveals. It shows you what you truly valued, what you tolerated too long, what you believed about love, worth, and identity. And in that reflection, you're handed a choice. Will I stay here, circling the same questions, or will I build from this? You see, the Stoics didn't run from discomfort. They walked straight into it, not to suffer, but to strip away illusion. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action, that what stands in the way becomes the way. And heartbreak for many is the greatest impediment of all. But what if it could become your teacher, your forge? What if instead of caging you, it refined you? This doesn't mean glamorizing the wound. It means refusing to waste it. Instead of asking how they could hurt you like that, ask what it revealed about your blind spots. Instead of replaying the ending, revisit the beginning and ask who you were that accepted so little, and then build from there, not as a performance, but as a rebirth. Let the long walks, the silence, the journals filled with questions become sacred rituals. Let the tears that once fell in confusion now water the roots of your clarity. Let the solitude that felt unbearable become the space where your future self is quietly forming. That's how pain becomes a sculptor, by working with it, not against it. And one day, not to impress them, not to make them regret, but simply as a fact of your existence, you'll look in the mirror and see a version of yourself that only that pain could have shaped. Not broken, not damaged, but defined. They may have left you with a scar, but you turned it into structure. 10. Let memory become your teacher, not your jailer. There's a difference between remembering and reliving, between learning from the past and letting it control you. When we're wounded, it's easy to keep circling the same mental loop. The things we said, the words they didn't mean, the promises broken, the moments we misread. And without realizing it, we build a prison out of what was. We don't just visit the past, we take up residence in it. But the Stoic doesn't stay there. He studies the past like a scholar, not like a prisoner. He walks into those memories, not to suffer again, but to extract the insight, to understand the pattern, to confront the illusion. Because memory, when seen clearly, becomes one of the most powerful teachers. It reveals what you ignored. It highlights who you were, and who you're becoming. But only if you stop letting it rule your present. There's a trap in romanticizing what hurt you, in confusing intensity with meaning. Sometimes we replay old relationships, not because they were good, but because they were familiar. We attach our identity to the story. I was abandoned. I was overlooked. I wasn't enough. But those aren't truths. They're interpretations, and interpretations can evolve. When you start seeing memory through the lens of growth, something shifts. You stop asking, why did they leave? And start asking, what did I learn about how I love? You stop wishing it had lasted and start wondering why you held on so tightly to something that wasn't aligned. You stop identifying as the one who got left behind and instead become the one who rose after. The Stoics believed that the past exists only in thought. It has no substance. It's a shadow we cast forward. And yet, how many of us let those shadows darken our present? How many let a single memory ruin 100 days of peace? To use memory wisely, you must return to it with discipline. You must sift through it for the gold, not cling to the rubble. You can honor the lesson without clinging to the pain. You can carry the insight without carrying the identity of the hurt version of you. That's what healing really is, outgrowing the story without erasing it. Because the truth is, you don't need to forget to move on. You just need to remember differently, to take the same scenes and watch them with wiser eyes, to stop editing out your own red flags, to stop blaming yourself for loving, but also stop confusing love with sacrifice. Let the memory sharpen your standards. Let it clarify what you'll no longer tolerate. Let it remind you of the strength it took to move through that fire, and the power it took to never go back. That way, memory becomes not a chain, but a compass. It points you forward, not backward. You were never meant to be the prisoner of your past. You were meant to be the author of its meaning. 11. Invest in your inner world so deeply they no longer belong in it. There's a turning point in healing, a quiet but undeniable moment where you stop asking why they left and start asking what you've been neglecting within yourself. That shift, it's everything. It's the moment the pain loses its grip, not because you forgot them, not because it stopped hurting, but because you finally began remembering you. The Stoics spoke often of the inner citadel, a fortress of mind and spirit that no external force could breach. That citadel doesn't build itself. It's shaped daily through the small, deliberate choices you make to return to yourself, to sit with your discomfort, to nourish your thoughts, to cultivate peace without requiring anyone else to provide it. And as you begin investing inward, not with pressure, but with presence, you notice something subtle. Their voice becomes quieter, their shadow less defined. It's not that you're erasing them, you're expanding beyond them. Your world begins to grow in ways they were never equipped to understand, let alone support. You start reading again, walking with purpose again. You sit in silence, not to avoid, but to listen. Your breath deepens, your thoughts get clearer. You notice how you used to shrink in rooms you now walk through confidently. How your old patterns dissolve under new awareness. How you no longer crave chaos because you've met your own calm. And most importantly, you stop inviting them into your inner space, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They don't belong in your thoughts anymore, not because of hate, but because of healing, because the person you're becoming would no longer resonate with the dynamic you once had. That version of you needed their attention. This version needs only alignment. It's not about proving anything to them. It's not about becoming so untouchable that they regret leaving. It's about creating such deep self-respect that even if they returned, even if they knocked, they wouldn't recognize the doorway. You've renovated the interior, rewritten the language, changed the locks. This is what true self-investment does. It rewires your attachments. You no longer choose based on loneliness. You choose based on values, resonance, peace. You realize your soul is sacred territory, and not everyone is meant to walk its halls. Some were visitors, not residents. And when their time ends, you let them go, not bitterly, but reverently. So take that time you once gave away and redirect it into books that stretch you, into habits that ground you, into silence that renews you, into art, into purpose, into movement, into solitude. Each minute you invest inward adds a new layer of clarity. Each act of devotion to yourself builds a life they can no longer step into, not because the door is locked, but because it no longer exists. That's the real glow-up. When your inner world becomes so rich, so full, so whole, that they fade not from spite, but from irrelevance. 12. Turn your heartbreak into a masterpiece. Heartbreak has a strange way of giving you the raw materials for a transformation you never asked for and often never wanted. It arrives uninvited, loud in its silence, sharp in its absence. And yet for the Stoic, this pain is not the end of the story. It's the blank canvas. The world may see heartbreak as a fracture, something broken beyond repair. But for the one who has learned to think clearly and feel deeply, it becomes something else, a space to create, a moment to rebuild from the core, a call to become someone who will never need to be rescued again. You didn't choose the pain, but you get to choose what it becomes. That is the Stoic's privilege, not to escape reality, but to use it, to take what others would call ruin and build from it a deeper foundation. Your solitude becomes your sanctuary. Your wounds become your wisdom. Your silence becomes a kind of music only the strong can hear. You are not weak because you felt everything. You are powerful because you refuse to stay broken. Think of it this way. When an artist begins a masterpiece, they don't start with perfection. They start with mess, with blankness, chaos, fragments. That's what pain gives you. The brush is made of discipline. The colors are made of your values. And the frame? It's shaped by your standards, the ones you've now rebuilt from the inside out. When someone walks away from you, they don't just leave a gap. They hand you a choice. You can collapse into the absence, or you can rise into the opportunity to paint something new. It's tempting in the beginning to want to prove something to them, to become so radiant they finally regret leaving. But that's not creation, that's performance. And performance fades. What lasts is what's built in silence, in integrity, in rooms where no one is watching. The masterpiece is not made for them. It's made for you, not to make them jealous, but to make you whole. The Stoics didn't avoid suffering, they refined it. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations in moments of triumph. He wrote them in struggle, in loss, in confusion, and through that discipline, his pain became philosophy. That's what you're doing now. You're not just healing, you're writing a philosophy through your life, one act at a time, one quiet hour at a time, one firm boundary at a time. Maybe your heart was shattered, but now you place the pieces back differently, not to recreate what was, but to construct something wiser, something sacred. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of their absence and start realizing you were always the artist of your becoming. You just needed space. And yes, sometimes heartbreak is the only thing that gives it. So journal through the ache. Sit in the discomfort. Walk long roads without music. Breathe deeper than the pain. You're not erasing them. you're evolving past them. And as the weeks pass, and your rituals deepen, and your standards rise, you'll see it clearly. Their memory doesn't sting anymore. It instructs, it humbles, and eventually, it fades. Because you've moved on not by forgetting, but by transforming. The masterpiece is not a perfect life. It's a present life, one that reflects who you are, what you've learned, and how deeply you've grown. It's the look in your eyes when you no longer need closure, the power in your step when you no longer seek validation, the peace in your voice when you speak only to those who've earned your presence. That's what they'll regret losing, not just the person you were, but the one they never stayed long enough to see you become. They thought they walked away from someone they understood, someone they could return to if regret ever visited. But what they didn't expect is who you would become in their absence. They didn't expect the silence to sculpt strength. They didn't expect the heartbreak to awaken wisdom. They didn't expect you to evolve in ways that made their version of you obsolete. This is the paradox. The one they left behind no longer exists. Not out of revenge, not from bitterness, but from a quiet decision to finally stop shrinking for people who never knew how to hold something real. Because this is what the Stoic path teaches, that suffering is not your identity, that being discarded is not the end, but the beginning of something cleaner, sharper, truer. Every wound became a window, every memory became a mirror, and somewhere along the journey, you stopped trying to make them see your worth and started living like you already knew it. Now you carry yourself differently. You speak less, but your presence says more. You love slower, but with depth. You no longer beg to be chosen because you've chosen yourself. That's the transformation they'll feel. Not in your posts, not in your silence, not in your success, but in the way your energy no longer bends toward them. That's when the regret begins. When they realize they didn't just lose someone, they lost the chance to witness something extraordinary being built. And if they ever return, they'll find the gates closed, not out of cruelty, but because the world you've created now has standards. Peace is the price of admission. Integrity is the language spoken. And those who didn't value your presence then no longer belong in the sacred stillness you've worked so hard to reclaim. This is your reminder. You were never meant to remain the same after being broken. You were meant to rise, quietly, intentionally, permanently. So build your masterpiece and let your becoming be the closure.